This is an interesting case. The man stood in court, smiling broadly, waving to the cameras and flashing peace signs, just moments before a judge sentenced him to 35 to 60 years in prison for second-degree murder. He was smiling like he was having a great time. He pleaded guilty, but immediately insisted he was not a killer. This is Desmond Burks, the man who admitted to the April 2023 killing of prominent Detroit neurosurgeon Dr. Devin Hoover, concealing the body in the attic crawl space, then swiftly using the doctor's credit cards and accounts for expensive purchases. A year later, he fatally assaulted another man during a road rage encounter. The sentencings occurred in February 2026. That courtroom composure amid such grave admissions raises immediate questions. What is going on inside of Desmond's mind? Why would he wave? Why would he flash peace signs and smile as if he's going to a concert? As a licensed professional counselor since 2007, I'm still seeing clients full-time. My clinical work that I see clients day in and day out shapes how I look at cases on the clinical file. This analysis is based purely on my speculations. It's not a diagnosis of anyone involved. There's no judgment, no sensationalism, just trying to trace the psychological patterns and the quiet warning signs that build over time. Another case, another clinical file. Woo! Sentencing wrapped up with Desmond Burks, now 35, receiving the agreed 35 to 60 years for second-degree murder of Dr. Hoover, plus concurrent 10 to 15 years for manslaughter of a 17-year-old in April 2024 road rage incident, and consecutive time for weapons charges. During the hearing, Burks spoke up, denying he was a murderer or a gang member, arguing against certain characterizations of his relationship with Hoover, and maintaining that the plea did not equate the actual commission of the murder. He appeared calm, even happy outside the courtroom. This public denial right after a guilty plea exemplifies cognitive dissonance, where conflicting realities create discomfort that the mind resolves by reframing or minimizing one side. Cognitive dissonance often drives defensive minimization, a mechanism where someone downplays their responsibility or the harm caused to safeguard their self-concept. In court settings, we see this when individuals accept legal accountability to avoid harsher outcomes like a full trial, yet psychologically resist full ownership to dodge shame or identity threat. Burks' insistence of not being a killer, despite the plea, suggests a strong reliance on this defense to preserve a view of himself as separate from the acts that he made. In the Hoover case, prosecutors pointed to jealousy as the core motive, specifically envy over Hoover's wealth and his interest in bringing other men into their intimate dynamic. Burks and Hoover shared a sexual relationship, with Burks frequently at the doctor's Boston home. Text messages showed occasional arrangements where Burks charged Hoover for sexual services. Hoover's financial stability contrasted sharply with Burks' reported struggles, including no steady job beyond selling pills and similar activities. The killing involved 2 gunshots to the head, after which the body was wrapped in a carpet and hidden in the attic. Almost immediately afterward, within minutes, fraudulent transactions began, including transfers via Cash App and purchases like high-end items, totaling over $20,000 that was stolen, plus valuables such as watches and a Range Rover. The swift pivot to financial exploitation after the violence indicates instrumental violence, where the act achieves a tangible goal like securing resources or removing an obstacle. Entitlement plays a heavy role here, the belief that one deserves access to another's assets without equivalent contribution. When that perceived entitlement faces a threat, perhaps Hoover's suggestion of including others or limits on generosity, resentment builds. Speculatively, this jealousy may connect to attachment insecurities, where fear of being replaced or devalued intensifies into a need to control or eliminate the source entirely. The relationship appears valued more for what it provided than the mutual connection. The contrast in behavior stands out here. Meticulous effort to hide the body versus reckless, traceable spending. This mismatch reflects poor impulse control alongside overconfidence in avoiding consequences. Antisocial tendencies often show in such compartmentalization, calculated in hiding evidence, impulsive in profiting openly. Long-term thinking falters when immediate gratification overrides caution. The separate road rage incident echoes this impulsivity. On April 17, 2024, Burks allegedly punched Rita, and after a minor collision at West Chicago and Greenfield Road, causing injuries that led to death on May 11th. But Burks described it as a slap and fled. The road rage commonly involves displaced anger, channeling deeper frustrations onto unrelated targets. For someone with prior unresolved violence, minor triggers like perceived disrespect can provoke extreme responses. This pattern can stem from underlying fears of inadequacy or abandonment, masked by dominance. Control becomes a shield against vulnerability. One similar case that illustrates these dynamics is the 2002 murders orchestrated by Jessica McCord in Hoover, Alabama. McCord, amid a bitter custody dispute and jealousy over her ex-husband Alan moving on with new wife, lured the couple into a trap where her husband, a former police officer, shot them both. The bodies were placed in their car and set on fire. Motives intertwined: jealousy, resentment over lost control in the relationship, and personal gain elements in the aftermath. While the differences exist, no direct financial exploitation via cars, no separate road rage, the core involves lethal reaction to perceived relational threats, manipulation of another to carry out violence, and entitlement that escalates betrayal when dynamics shift unfavorably. Burks allegedly involved others in spending Hoover's money post-killing, with witnesses granted immunity to testify about coordinating purchases. This points to Machiavellism traits, using interpersonal manipulation for self-interest with little ethical restraint. The betrayal here feels acute. Hoover opened his home and life to Burks, only for trust to end in lethal violence. Such violations deepen trauma for survivors, who often question their own judgment long after. Burks's courtroom smile and denial suggest limited remorse or insight, common when denial dominates coping. If Burks really had accountability, it would demand confronting the harm that he caused, but instead heavy defenses can prevent being remorseful. The impact on victims' family endures and will continue to endure. Hoover's community lost a skilled neurosurgeon who touched many lives and saved lives, no doubt. The person who was slapped by Burks and died in a road rage, loved ones face sudden violent loss from an ordinary drive. These events create lasting grief, anger, and confusion, especially with betrayal or apparent randomness. If exploring these patterns of entitlement, minimalization, cognitive dissonance, and control-seeking help clarify how they can lead to tragedy, I'd love to keep offering you these breakdowns. Subscribe if you want the next one to land in your feed. It's completely free. It takes 2 seconds and it helps me keep making content that actually examines the mental health realities behind the headlines. The behavioral clues from rapid exploitation to courtroom denial circle back to consistent struggles with accountability, emotional regulation, and impulse control across contexts. Here are the mental health and psychological terms that I mentioned in the Desmond Burks case. All of these are used speculatively based on observed behavioral patterns. It's not a formal diagnosis. Cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort experienced when holding 2 or more contradictory beliefs, values, or behaviors at the same time, like pleading guilty while publicly insisting one is not the killer, often resolved by reframing, denying, or minimizing one side of the conflict. Defensive minimization, it's a coping mechanism in which a person consciously or unconsciously downplays the seriousness of their actions, their level of responsibility, or the harm caused in order to protect their self-image and avoid overwhelming guilt, shame, or identity threat. Narcissistic tendencies is a personality feature characterized by a strong sense of entitlement, a need for admiration or special treatment, viewing others primarily as sources of validation or resources, and heightened sensitivity to perceived threats to status or supply. Antisocial features, behavioral patterns involving disregard for the rights and feelings of others, impulsivity, deceitfulness, lack of remorse, and difficulty consistently anticipating caring about long-term consequences of actions. Instrumental violence, aggression or harm carried out deliberately to achieve a specific practical goal, such as gaining money, removing the obstacle, or securing control, rather than arising purely from emotional rage or loss of control. Extreme poor impulse control, which is difficulty in inhibiting immediate urges or emotional reactions, especially under stress or provocation, resulting in actions that are hasty, disproportionate, or poorly thought out in terms of consequences, like the road rage incident. Control seeking, a strong drive to maintain dominance, predictability, or influence over relationships, situations, or other people, often because of loss of control, feels intolerable and triggers defensive or aggressive behavior to restore it. Attachment insecurities, underlying difficulties in forming or maintaining secure emotional bonds, frequently rooted in early experiences which can manifest as intense fear of abandonment, rejection sensitivity, jealousy, or preemptive actions to avoid perceived relational threats. Machiavellian traits, interpersonal style marked by intentional manipulation, deceit, and exploitation of others to achieve personal goals, with a pragmatic focus of self-interest and relatively low concern for conventional ethics or loyalty. Very interesting here to see the behavior of Burks after his sentencing. He smiled and waved and flashed peace signs, and he was having a good time, it seemed like, after he just confessed to being a killer. Well, no, he didn't confess to being a killer. He was charged of being a killer. He said he wasn't a killer. So what did you think about this Desmond Burks case? Were there any elements of the psychological dynamics or patterns particularly striking to you? And that closes this clinical file. Until next time, keep looking a little deeper, stay curious, and stay safe. If you get yourself spotting behavioral patterns everywhere, no matter where you look, welcome to my world.